Thank
Double
you.
check. Um, okay, it says recording, so I think we're
All
good.
right, shall we get started? I think it's been about 5 minutes, so people might still trickle in, but good to get going. So for highlights, I will hand it off to Kevin. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. It says recording with Phantom. Okay, cool. We're good. Okay. Should I let me share my screen? Can everyone see this? Okay, cool. Thanks for joining, everyone. Let's go through the highlights. We have a new committer. Wow, congratulations, Gang Wu. Um, he's not here, I don't think, but yeah, congratulations. Really good to see more people contributing and becoming committers. Awesome. For the Java highlights, we have updating Flink to use the new file writer factory. Thank you, Peter. Fix accessor API on related additions. Thank you to Edward. Uh, remove deprecated refreshing auth manager. Thanks, Alex. Added the Iceberg BigQuery run to the runtime jar. Thanks, Vasamorokov. Support custom record type in Parquet internal. Thank you to Russell. Flink ensured dynamic committer idempotence. Thanks to Max. And then I'll just go through this whole section and then I'll pass it to someone else. For Iceberg, thanks Gabriel for cleaning up and consolidating tests. Uh, thanks Aniki and Nathan for making the expression serializable. That's a big one. Thanks Luis for replacing pre-commit with pre-K. Thanks Japster for adding the update sort order logic. And then thanks Kevin for moving test infra to use Spark Connect with Spark 4. It's a really cool change if you want to go see it. Uh, for Iceberg Russ, thanks Raminder for working on the REST catalog authentication. Thanks Sean for refactoring the writers for partition rights. And thanks Alan for working on the register table for SQL catalog. For Iceberg CPP, we have add support for a mess and build system. Thanks, William. Add scaffolding for expression. Thanks, gang. Thanks, Junwan, for adding UUID memory representation. And thanks, Lee, for working on the binary literal serialization and deserialization. For Iceberg Go, we have thanks, Alessandro, for adding support for statistics. Thanks, Tobias, for working on table updates. And then I added this on the very end for the website. We had some cleanups. So thanks, Russell, for helping to remove the blogs and talks page from the site. I said remove, but we replaced it with some Iceberg content from the summit. And then thanks, Kevin, for adding the Apache approved web analytics. It's weird to thank myself, but it's really cool to see the web analytics page and see where people are most interested in our docs. Should I pass it on or keep doing the release?
Yeah, I can take over
Okay, great.
for releases. I think the two main things are it's great to see the Rust 0.7 and Go 0.4 releases out. Thanks to everyone who participated in validating those releases, and especially to all the contributors that are working hard on those implementations. It's really great to see those things continuing to move. So thanks everyone. I think the only planned upcoming release to talk about is the 1.10 release, and I think Huashen is planning to be the release manager. I don't see her here, but I think that there are a few things that we know are still sort of blockers. So there's the client fix for S3 file IO. I believe this is where if you use a certain invocation of how you get the HTTP client, it does the wrong thing. Dan, do you have more information there?
It's mostly just we were reusing the underlying HTTP client, but then some close operations were resulting in it closing it for all AWS clients that were using that. And so I think that I'm not sure if that one went in yet or if we're still waiting on the last little review, but we're close, I think, in making sure that like that doesn't abnormally abort the HTTP client. So.
And that was because like different stages in Spark, when you close it on the executor side, would close the client pool for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think the fix there was pretty not obvious too, right?
Yeah, it was not. It gets into like how the SDK for AWS kind of treats that underlying client and different ways of setting up the client. So I don't think we fully fixed all of the issues. Like there's still kind of this general problem with how do you close things in distributed environments in Spark? Like what is the right mechanism to make sure that like as you're tearing everything down for a stage of a job that everything is getting closed properly. But that's been kind of a persistent issue. I can take the next one too, which is the signer credential fix, which was, I believe, Alex, or actually, I think it was Christian pointed this out. So we had an issue where, because of the way that we were doing the setup for the remote signing, it was actually pinning to the very first base path that it receives for remote signing. And so if you had multiple catalogs set up and they were all doing remote signing to their respective catalog implementations, it was actually making requests to the wrong catalog because only the first one that was seen was actually getting captured. And that imposed a small security risk because you were passing valid tokens to the incorrect catalog. So we fixed this by not pinning the base version, but always using a fully qualified URL when doing remote signing. Christian, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
So if you're using earlier versions, don't use multiple catalogs with remote signing. That won't work. But this should fix that.
Awesome. Thank you guys for getting that in. Always good to be fixing security holes. Then there is also a problem with logging conflicts between, I believe, Spark and the AWS bundle that the fix went in, but we also probably want to backport that fix to prior Spark versions, right? So that's another one. And then Prashant, just one second. Prashant just added fixed location provider for serializable table. Prashant, do you want to talk any about that one and what's going on there?
Precisely. So for the custom catalog implementation for people who have their own table operations and they override the location provider there, in the serializable table interface, rather than calling the custom implementation of the location provider, it's calling a different API, which is not correctly calling the custom implementation. So essentially what the change why this was not happening is because earlier we had a patch in serializable table in case I use a custom location provider and that provider is not available during the read. We should not break the table. We should not fail. Essentially, let's say if I add a custom location provider and it's not present in my class path, but I just want to read the table. So I don't want to fail on that particular scenario if it's not present in the class path. So we added a fix for that. Unfortunately, that fix caused this regression in which people who use custom location provider and have their own custom catalog implementation to override the location provider, they are not able to get the benefits of it. So a couple of folks from AWS and especially S3 table teams has been trying to reach out with this issue. And there is already a fix out there and a couple of people have taken a look into it. So since they have like raised it a couple of times, it would be nice if we can get this in. So that's the whole crux of this issue. Yeah.
That sounds good. Looks like the implementation needs some work to clean it up, but I agree that'd be a good thing to get in. All right. If there's anything else, please have a committer add it to the milestone or raise the issues on the dev list. I don't know what our timeline is for 1.10.1, but it would make sense to try and get it in or get it out fairly soon. So thanks for taking a look at that. Okay, next up, the actual agenda items. I wanted to mention a couple things quickly before we jump into the others because I think these are small. First of all, we're nearing completion of the final version of our proposal, we think, for relative paths in V4. So keep an eye out on the dev list for a scheduled discussion of the relative paths. We've been having focused discussions on each of the big items. And so that probably will not happen in this sync, but it'll have a separate dedicated discussion. Next, there's also an ongoing vote for Spark 3.4 deprecation, which is something I think that we want to call out. I believe that there are still some people using Spark 3.4, even though I heard that it's end of life. This is not something I've taken a deep look at because I don't use Spark 3.4. However, if you do use Spark 3.4, please take a look on the mailing list and weigh in on that vote. I think that we want to only remove these code paths if there's no utility in sharing them. So if there are a bunch of organizations still using 3.4 and that want to share code through the Iceberg repository, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. We just need to know who's out there using what versions. Anurag?
Hey, Ryan, yeah, about 3.4, I think the Data Fusion Comet team wanted to keep it in a deprecated state. I don't know if we have either Huashin or Matt here from the Data Fusion Comet team. But they responded on the thread saying they would like to postpone the deprecation because Comet needs 3.4.
Yeah, I think that sounds good to me. I just want to call it out here as something where if your organization uses Spark 3.4 and you want to continue, collaborating with others and contributing to that support, please comment and make sure that we don't overlook you. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah.
And next.
Sorry, just a quick note on the Spark 3.4. I think we should err towards keeping it if anyone has would like to keep another version. I think that's the stance that I think would be good for the community in terms of we don't want to pull it on there from someone. That's something I would like to discuss. Dan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think we just need to balance that with, there are a lot of people who don't move very quickly through Spark versions, but that doesn't mean that you can't use the existing releases. And what ends up happening is some of the features as we move forward are harder and harder to maintain and continue to backport consistently. So all the variant work is not going back into earlier versions. Yeah. And the further we move, the harder it is to maintain. So it's kind of what good is just keeping it in releases if we're not actually changing any of the code in it? So at some point we just say, well, this is the last supported version. You can continue using it. It really comes down to how long do we want to hold on to these?
Yeah,
I agree. I think the bar should be, are people actively maintaining it and sharing the maintenance load of making changes to it? If we don't want it if it's just going to sit around and be deprecated and unchanging. At that point, I think it's time to remove it. But
it also doesn't prevent us from putting fixes because so 110 has it, and if there was a problem that was found after we'd already released a 111, 112, you can always do a 110.2 and fix whatever major issue was found in Spark 3.4. So it doesn't necessarily stop us from still keeping some level of support. It just means it's not going to be in future releases, right?
Yeah. Does that seem reasonable, Kevin?
Yeah, I think just a quick note on this. It's already marked as deprecated. that PR went in. I think the next decision is whether or not we want to remove it.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't see the deprecation. It specifically mentioned deprecation, and yeah, I mean, what you guys just said makes sense. I think we should maybe add to the just our webpage to mention that, hey, you know, if there's a if there's a an issue, we can drop a patch release. I think just that balances out a lot of things. But what I was talking about was fully removing Spark 3.4 for the next release. So like get rid of it, get rid of the release for the next one.
Yeah, I think that that's the question, and that's really what we're talking about, because whether you market deprecated or not, like, I think it is good to market deprecated so that people know, you know, it's no longer supported upstream, so it's not really all that well supported here, especially with 3.5 and 4.0 out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just echo that it's actually end of life, you know, in open source Spark. And at this point, I bet that whoever like runs on 3.4 probably have their own forks of 3.4 that are also like being maintained separately, right? So we've seen that there's not that much traction in open source 3.4. So we kept those older versions as a place for people to collaborate. And that was a couple of years ago. And I don't think this is in a place where it's being actively maintained and maybe shared by multiple companies or anything like that. So I understand the common problem, you know, but the flip side of it is like it really slows down the development of any major features. Even if it's deprecated, you know, the row ID was a great example of that, because it required a completely different implementation. It was really hard to do and slow down the development of row ID quite a bit.
Yeah, I haven't taken a look at the common issue, but I'll take a look today. If you guys don't mind just commenting on the same thread so that we can have the discussion over there as well, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. Next up is replication. So I'll hand it off to Shinling.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, it's an idea of adding the replication functionality into the Iceberg. I know a lot of companies, for the disaster recovery, cross-region replicate, you're doing a separate service. Also, there's some issues, etc. We are using that as well. So I talked to a few people in the community. They saw this, they are interested. So I propose putting into this doc and send it to the dev list probably a few weeks back. I saw quite a few people comment on that. I also want to hear from you guys concerns, feedbacks, anything I can address.
So I read through the doc a little while ago, and one of the things that I think was called out is, replication changes significantly when we get to V4 and we have relative paths. So this is largely targeted at the case where we have absolute paths and we're trying to achieve some sort of like rewrite of those locations.
Yeah.
And the question that I had was like, if I remember correctly, the proposal is largely that you kind of like dual write metadata, right? So the committer is producing both for the main location as well as the replica location.
Yeah, for now, yes.
Yeah, so there's kind of like this fundamental difference between like inline synchronous production of it versus like out of line asynchronous replication.
Yeah.
And so is the driving factor behind this that like you actually want the replication to happen before commit, and what is the use case around that versus separating those two things and saying like, hey, the commit path just commits to a table and the replication is an out of band, like after the fact kind of thing, kind of like the relocate procedure or whatever that happens to be called that, is used in other cases for something like this. So, because like the concern that I have is this introduces like this duplicate write path within the commit path, which I have some concerns with just in terms of like you're adding a lot of complexity then to the commit path.
Yeah. So basically, so the writing is more of like replicating after the commit is done, and also it's a fail open. What it means is if this replication is such a fail, the current commit can still succeed and proceed. It won't impact that. It just catch up next time. Um, so the issue that we are seeing is out of band. You have the separate service replicating also brings some complexity, which we are using. You have sent to the event, catch up, latency, etc. So it's not something like enforce. It by default, it's a flag. By default, you can turn it off. So it's just provide an option for user for some users case they can use either natively having that feature by just enabling, because setting up a separate autobahn is also complexity for that. It's just option, just enable.
So then what's the difference between like just in your job committing normally and then running a procedure to do replication versus what you're describing?
Yeah, so procedure, you have to have the separate procedure to do that. There's quite a few complexity for that, like the metadata, the data consistency, all of this quite complicated using the procedure to make it totally consistent across these two copies.
I guess I'm not sure that I understand the difference in terms of the complexity. You have to do all the same things, whether you're running a procedure or you're doing it through some sort of commit path, right?
So currently we are not using the procedure. Procedure will be too hard to using the procedure to do the full replication because the functionality of replication is quite complicated. Generally, what I see is people using separate service, just totally separated, and then watch or monitor this commit and then do the replication. But that also has complexity, inconsistency issue, etc. So it's just the two different options. I agree with some use cases like high throughput, etc. Adding this functionality may impact their I/O because they just want the first time the commit going fast. In that case, by default is disabled. But do in some cases like simply use cases low throughput, you just simply enable it. It just work as out of box.
Stephen.
Yeah, my overall impression of the doc, I feel it lack a little bit detail, especially for example on the failure handling, because right now we're talking about dual rights, and also talk about the doc mentioned like a failure retry, but I don't understand what retry means for batch job. I say a Spark, I committed.
Well, yeah, it's mainly for Flink. For the failure retries, I feel like we can probably drive into details on that. It's mainly for the streaming scenarios.
Okay, yeah, but the doc didn't call this a batch streaming. Yeah,
Yeah, we can do that. We can we can put more details on that failure scenarios handling.
I think I agree with both Stephen and Dan here. It's not quite obvious what is being proposed, or at least you have to kind of read in quite a bit. My interpretation is that this is saying let's build into the table interface native replication, right? So when I commit to a table, I have some, synchronous or asynchronous replication guarantees. I think that asynchronous would be fine and reasonable to basically kick off, something equivalent to the stored procedure. I share Dan's concern that I don't know that the stored procedure is really any different. The synchronous case, though, really I find concerning because then you're inserting something that is either optional or not. Like it's something that you can't necessarily roll back. So, is this saying that we would commit to 2 catalogs in different regions within a single catalog commit? Because I don't think that is possible. And any time that we have, had anything that happens after a commit, it has caused consistency issues and basically broken commit mechanisms or wedge tables to have anything whatsoever other than like returning yes or no, this was committed.
Yeah, no, I understand. For the catalog, we need to use a separate catalog. That's generally that we are using for its own DC. Yeah, but I understand, but the implementation would be totally separated out into a standalone library. The implementation will be in a way that just like a few lines injected into the commitment. You can with a flag by default it just disabled. But we can also explore the procedure way, see if which one make more sense.
So I think it would be fine to notify after a commit happens, but I think that there is a serious problem with the idea of a synchronous commit to multiple catalogs, because then you have committed data to one catalog and you don't know if you can commit to the second catalog. And then combining that with whether or not the job fails and has to retry, you can easily cause data corruption or table corruption issues by doing that. So I think that this must be strictly asynchronous with respect to committing to a catalog, in which case, we really want to think through what is the best way to handle this architecturally.
I would just add that like the current procedure for like the rewrite table paths is probably not necessarily targeted in exactly the way that you're thinking about it. So if you think about more like, hey, what do we need to do to replicate? You need one to move the physical data in some way, right? Then you need to do a metadata rewrite operation.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to do a commit of that rewrite operation. And like the current procedure was for a very specific use case. It's probably not what most people would do for replication, because there was like a lot of other aspects that went into why that procedure operates the way it does.
Mm-hmm.
But you could roll all of that functionality into a procedure that then achieves the async behavior that you're looking for. It isn't in the same commit, and that's why I kind of started out with like, does it need to be a synchronous operation, because most of the time replication trails whatever the primary commit is.
Yeah, for that I agree. I think synchronized versus asynchronized definitely makes sense for this proposal. We do provide the two options, but I just don't know like implementing the procedure versus natively adding this code. Would be make it easier, but for having this basic functionality but for the interface API, how do we trigger this replication? I think probably that's the most of the discussion we are discussing here. We can, I can think about it, twice, and then come up with how do we trigger this. For that's multiple layers, right? One is the replication itself is a heavy work, whether or not in the procedure or in the code, in the Iceberg code. That's one. Second is how do we trigger in a synchronized or asynchronous way? We can put it into the proposal.
So for the triggering, don't we have the event API discussion? Would that work for the replication triggering?
I suspect that what we want to do here is actually use the client and the client's resources to do the replication, because I agree with you. Like if you want to delegate to an external service, that would probably go through the events API. If you wanted to have the catalog handle replication itself, it could do whatever it chooses. But if you want the job that writes to immediately turn around and replicate, I think there is something to this proposal. I think though that we would want to put pretty strict limits on it and have probably some sort of notification system notify another component that then kicks off the job.
So there's one other thing that I'm aware of that makes this a little complicated to do in a synchronous way. And I think that this gets back to I think you can only do true replication asynchronously. And the reason for that is if you want true replication, like everything in the metadata should actually line up. The snapshot IDs should line up. And you actually aren't guaranteed things like your sequence numbers, your snapshot ID, like all the other stuff that you potentially want to write to whatever your replicate is to be certain until you've actually completed your commit to the original catalog, right? And at that point, you may be postponing the next execution within your job to execute like the synchronous nature of it, but it's not really synchronous. Like you have to do that after you've committed to the table. If there's a failure in the interim, like you would not necessarily be able to, produce that exactly synchronously or guarantee that it happens atomically, within that commit operation. So you're effectively asynchronous, and then it's just a matter of like, well, how do we sequence those things? So that in your job, for anybody who's like coming after you, it appears to be atomic. Ryan?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I think that you could do synchronous replication in one case. That is if you use a multi-table transaction to commit to both tables at the exact same time. If you want separate catalogs that are like separated by region, I don't see a way to do it. And I also I don't think what you want is a multi-table transaction with the exact same commit data, because of how long that would take. Like you would be essentially saying like my transaction takes the time it takes to replicate across regions. So I'm pretty sure that this has to be asynchronous, or that we would never actually want to build something that is truly synchronous. The commit operation has to reflect an atomic operation. And like I said, we get even timeouts and network failures, and all those things have just caused us a lot of headaches over the years. So whatever the commit produces, you want to do 0 extra steps to return that value back to the client.
Yeah, that I agree. Yes.
So the next steps for this, it sounds like, I think could use some additional color in the document to, I think, really get down to what is being proposed. It sounds like the need is to, have client-side replication triggered immediately after a commit using client resources, and then and that would go for essentially whatever replication operation you choose to use in the engine, right? So you could have Flink replicating files as soon as they're cut and produced, and then gather that and write the replica afterwards. I think seeing a design around how to do that in a generic way for these engines would be really interesting. So
yeah, because we can always provide a default implementation that just uses like file IO and like the other things to rewrite data, but you probably actually want an optimized version that does distributed copy, distributed rewrite of metadata. What does that look like? How do you plug that in for Flink and Spark? Those are probably the more interesting details of the implementation.
Got it.
So
All right.
for Flink, we probably can leverage the maintenance framework that Peter Wary and others have built, but it's not generic for all the engines. I do think that Flink, that post commit, you can add action. I do think that seems to work well for the Flink framework. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and just last thing on this, for those of you who haven't read the proposals yet, I think Xin Li will be presenting on this topic next week at the Seattle meetup, and we'll get it recorded, and hopefully that'll be an easier consumable content.
Yeah, so I may have some change, but I will talk to you later.
Okay, great. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks for working on this. It'll be a good thing to get in. Okay. Next up on the agenda, we have file format API update. You want to take it, Peter?
Yeah, sure. That's an usual motif of these things is that file format API is there. We had a good discussion on Monday, and I updated the PRs. So PR, I left only the API PR for now, and I would love to see everybody to take a last kind of look there. I updated it based on the discussions on Monday. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
And I think this is another good time to highlight, thank you for moving Flink over to use the newer file writer API. That's actually a really significant change. We introduced the file writer API for some refactoring in Spark. It now uses file classes that actually produce data file or delete file metadata, which is easier overall to use. And it's really great to close this gap and move everything onto the same writers. So thanks, Peter, for working on this in both Flink and Kafka. So really
Kafka
great.
is good. I've just merged the Kafka ones. Thanks, Steven, for the review as well. So
Awesome.
basically, all of the file appender factories internal uses other than tests is.
And that's great. That actually makes it so much easier for us to maintain these things because now we can start removing code. I think there's the question here about timeline, and I would say as soon as possible. So 1.12 seems reasonable to me. Our guarantees for API, the API module follows semver. However, for the core module, because that's more of a service provider interface and people building on top of Iceberg, not using its public APIs, we only guarantee one minor release for deprecations. So I would love to get these things deprecated and in a position where we can remove them for the 1.12 release.
So I look at some of the other deprecation, the core module, they are marked as 2.0. So yeah, that's why.
Oh, okay. I mean, we should probably fix that because we don't want to claim when they're going to be removed and then remove them earlier. So as long as that is not released, we should probably get that updated.
I think Stephen was referring not the changes we made around this at this point, but other changes previously committed and released.
Okay. Yes, I'm not sure what changes are marked against 2.0, but we would probably want to take a look at those and see what we can do. I think we don't have an obligation in core to not change that to a sooner, a version that will come out sooner. But we do want to think about how that affects people. Because if we say, hey, we'll remove this in 2.0, and then we remove it in 1.12 without warning, that would be bad.
I can take on that. I will. I'm in a conference now, but after that, I will collect all of the deprecations to 2.0 from the core module, and I will highlight it in a list, and we can discuss it.
This also kind of raises the idea around 2.0, and when we want to start taking a look at that. I know that as we introduced like CDF and change scans, that did quite a bit of that introduced quite a bit of change to our scan planning APIs that has never really been cleaned up. So we still have the original like table scan API, and then now there's a base scan and other things. It would probably be good for us to go and take a look at those. I think there's also a context that we don't need. We might want to see what we can do to clean that up, and then of course figure out when we want to target a 2.0 release. just something to start thinking about, I guess.
I would love to have the 112 release, 111 release first, so we can still really start removing 112. So in the 2.0, so probably we should decide on what to do. Release 111, and then we can think about 2.0, and we can really release stuff, remove stuff.
Yeah, good plan. Okay, the last topic is the GCS file I/O.
Yeah. Hi, so I'm from GCS team in Google, and we have created a library, GCS Analytics Core, where we are moving the core optimizations related to data analytics into this common library. And I think same can be leveraged in Iceberg as well. Currently, we have moved three optimizations: Parquet footer prefetching, small object caching, and threaded vectored IO. And with this, we are observing improvement in the micro benchmark. So I wanted to open a discussion around this and wanted to know the early suggestions. And
yeah, so we're actually going through a similar effort on the AWS side with the accelerated analytics library, whatever that one is called. And most of what we've been working on is plumbing through the Parquet, vectored IO implementation, which I believe has been committed now, at least at the Parquet IO to file IO layer. So if you support range readable interface, it will delegate calls into that. What we want to do is similar with the other libraries, make sure that we're kind of aligning what the responsibility of that core library is, how that fits with the IO and the Parquet layers, so that we don't have any mismatches of behavior. Because the last thing we want to do is have caching or consolidation at multiple layers that conflict with each other and result in either less than ideal or, in worst case, like overreads or something like that. So I don't have the PR in front of me for the one that was done for the Parquet IO, but we should look through that whole path and make sure that everything is kind of tied together, and then make sure that we understand what the responsibility is to the library that is reasonable to delegate to. Does that kind of make sense if you looked at those other PRs?
No, we haven't looked at it. We will look at it.
Okay, we can find that and share.
And vectored IO, we have two different implementations. Right now, we have the threaded one. Upcoming one is we have gRPC by die APIs, where this read vector actually happens on server side over the gRPC channel. So that is an upcoming change on top of it, which we will add.
Is that just a offset within the file to read? Is that how it's exposed through the API?
So it's exposed over gRPC's channel. It happens synchronously. We send the all the offsets to server, and it synchronously sends us the responses.
Yeah, but so the gRPC thing is like hidden behind the actual interfaces within the SDK, right? So I guess, what does the interface look like? Does it align with the range readable so that we can actually consolidate ranges that we're requesting for the underlying Parquet file?
Yeah, it inlines with that. We just need to add a translation from Parquet classes to GCS classes.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're doing like 2 rounds of translation, because we go from the Parquet representation to the Iceberg representation to the underlying representation and back. But it's mostly just passing through, at least on the S3 side, it's mostly passing through, I believe, byte buffers or something like that we're using to populate the actual data from the source. Is that consistent, or is there something else that you're using, like channels or something else that we have to translate?
We translate into GCS specific proto, talking about the gRPC API, which we are exploring.
Only the library surface area. So like what's happening below that, like what, whether you're doing protobuf or REST, or it doesn't really matter. It's more of a question of like, we can probably just take this offline and look at the APIs, but it's mostly like, what kind of level of translation, and do we have the right passing between those? Because I think we just want to maintain as little copy as possible through that path. Like if we can do 0 copy through this all the way down through the SDK, that would be ideal.
Okay.
And I think we're set up for that as long as you can populate byte buffers.
Okay.
Kevin?
Yeah, so AAL is what you want to look at in the repo. It's called Analytics Accelerator Library.
Well, yeah, so that's the S3 side. We haven't plumbed that through. Right now, there's a PR that was for Parquet IO.
Yeah.
That's recent. It was probably within the last couple of weeks that it got.
So that's just a reference. And then the question I had was, are any of the optimizations related to GCS specifically, or are these like Parquet optimizations? Because we're having the same kind of conversations with the S3 side, and if these optimizations are shareable or similar, you know, we can gather them together and just irrespective of the cloud provider and make these work. I think that'll be an interesting approach.
The current ones are, I think, can be common.
Yeah.
The read vectored, the upcoming, like the gRPC one, that is GCS specific. That is a server side API.
Right.
Then there are few optimizations which are GCS specific. That are not present right now. That is in plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it might be a good idea to separate like the cloud specific optimizations versus like the Parquet optimizations. Just a thought. Because yeah, I think I work at Microsoft. We have the same conversations internally about optimizations and adding like storage optimization libraries as well. So this would be really helpful in that front.
I think, for example, vectored IO, the default implementation is to call read fully. Sequentially, we are doing threaded one. If you threaded one is beneficial in general, we can move this one level up in the default implementation as well.
Well, so in the default implementation is doing just a serial one because it's relying on the range readable and what's available from that. But you can, in your range readable implementation, you can override the behavior to do, parallel reads, to consolidate differently than, because I believe Parquet is only consolidating reads that are contiguous for column chunks. And then it passes through anything else. So if you want to make a choice like, hey, if it's less than a megabyte or whatever, we're going to do a read through operation, consolidate that to a larger read, or or break them up into smaller reads if they're certain sizes. I think those are the kind of questions we need to figure out, so we're not like consolidating at a higher level, breaking up at a lower level, double caching footers. Those are the kind of things that I'm worried about. We're getting into a space where the optimizations may be overlapping with things that already exist in the library, and we don't want to just add extra if we don't need to. And maybe there's opportunity to share something like footer caches or something like that if it's more generalized.
Exactly. Like rather than having a whole bunch of I guess storage specific libraries that know better and do different things at the Parquet layer, we would much rather settle on what should we be doing at the Parquet layer and then control the storage layer the exact same way for all storage libraries. That I think that's the general preference. It cuts down on duplication of caches and work, but also means that no matter what you're using, you get the same nice optimizations.
The one other thing that I would add is it would be helpful, because we're doing this on the other side as well, which is understanding what impact this is going to have on people using it. Because if the underlying library changes a 128 megabyte read into a whole bunch of like 4 megabyte reads because it's faster, because you're doing more parallel operations and you're trying to saturate the network bandwidth, but it also 25x's the actual number of requests that you're performing, that can have a really big impact to people using it from a cost perspective. So just making sure that we are articulating what's happening, if there are configurations, people know about them, and like this is one of those things where we don't want to change it in a really negative way, even if it provides small benefit, and like how do we measure that? Like we're getting into the territory where we actually have to care about these things given the scale of operations that we're affecting.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing this up, and I'm sure we'll get more attention on it. Sounds like Dan is offering to review.
I have been for the other stuff, so I can continue. Feel free to reach out. Yeah.
Yeah. So good to have these things going in. Are there any other topics before we break? We've got about 5 minutes left, so enough time for a short topic or to just barely get into a large topic and have to address it later. All right, sounds like nothing new. So thank you guys for coming. Good to see everyone, and we'll see you next week for the REST catalog sync. Bye.
See ya. Bye.